Who are you? What makes you you? What is your identity? On the surface, these seem like simple questions, but when you take a closer look, they become difficult to find a single answer to. There is no single generic definition of identity that scholars from different social science disciplines can agree on. But broadly speaking, identity is the overall character or personality of an individual or even a group. It is the beliefs, qualities, expressions, and ideas that make an individual or a group different from others. Sociologists, psychologists, linguists, philosophers, and even anthropologists have contributed a great deal to the way that we conceptualize and understand identity. Some theories and concepts about identity that have come out of these fields include social identity theory, double consciousness, and so on. The two forms of identity that are a part of social identity theory include social identity and self-identity. Social identity refers to those characteristics that other individuals attribute to us, while self-identity refers to the development of a unique sense of self and a distinct worldview. Self or personal identity is comprised of things unique to each individual, such as personality traits, while social identity is comprised of the groups that we belong to or our community. Social identity theory focuses a great deal on the relationship between personal and social identity. This relationship is built by categorizing ourselves and others, identifying with a group or category, through exhibiting certain behaviors and actions, and by comparing ourselves with another. This concept is important in understanding prejudice, for example. Once groups begin identifying as separate and distinct, competition and animosity can develop, or they can be manipulated by members of the group. Alongside the practice of categorizing ourselves and others into different groups, it is important to note that we can belong to many different categories all at the same time. For example, I'm a Caucasian woman, a professor, a parent, all at the same time. However, at some times, certain aspects of my identity may become more pronounced than others. As we work through this course, for example, it's likely that you'll see me first and foremost as a professor, and that's the role that I'll have at the forefront of my mind. Our ability to belong to several categories and groups and to have multifaceted identity lends itself to something called identity crisis. These are periods of time where there's confusion and uncertainty that can lead to internal conflict at the individual and societal level, which we'll discuss later in some other videos. One negative way that this internal conflict can be lived is best explained by W.E.B. Du Bois in his concept of double consciousness. This is a feeling that you have more than one somewhat conflicting social identities, and it can be hard to develop a true sense of self. However, this concept was originally intended to describe a situation in which oppressed groups are forced to operate. Du Bois outlined double consciousness in his book published in 1903, The Souls of Black Folk, where he argued that Black Americans lived in an African American culture that valued equality, while at the same time living in an American culture that devalued Black people. He believed that Black Americans were forced to live their lives seeing themselves through the eyes of a racist society. He argued that this was damaging to the development of self-identity and to self-esteem as individuals. They internalized these sentiments as being against their very being, leading to self-criticism and doubt. This concept is still incredibly important today and has been used to explain identity in the face of other forms of social inequality, perhaps most notable in the struggle of women in patriarchal societies. Now that we've spent some time exploring a few of the definitions, theories, and concepts of identity, let's consider some of the things that comprise identity. This brings us back to the question, what makes you, you? An individual's identity can be comprised of many things. Things like ethnicity, religion, culture, sex, gender, and sexual orientation. Even socioeconomic standing and our physical attributions can all shape our identities. Let's focus now on the role that ethnicity, religion, and culture play in identity formation. Now, usually when we speak of culture, we're more specifically referring to a system of beliefs and a way of life. However, culture does not have to be confined to a social group. It can be used to describe place or time. This allows us to be part of and participate in several cultures all at once. For example, you might think of yourself primarily as being culturally American. You may also be a participant in an office culture at your place of work, so two cultures working side by side. Cultures can have multiple dimensions with subcultures existing within cultures. For example, Italian Americans may have a subculture that encompasses aspects of American identity with influences from Italian culture. Additionally, culture is typically passed on from one generation to the next through a process of socialization. Culture is therefore a set of learned, shared behaviors. We know that for real societal change to occur, culture has to change. Yet we also know that this can take generations to happen. Another factor is religion. Religion in the traditional sense is a culturally organized set of beliefs, ceremonies, and rules that are used to worship a being or a group of beings. Religion serves as a great reminder that identity is fluid, as people often convert from one religion to another, or may shift through periods of not associating with a religion to being devout followers of a religion later on. While religion can be a part of culture, it is important to note that the two are not one and the same. Religion can be very significant, not only in shaping self-identity, but also in the formation of social identities, as it helps us to better understand the groups that we belong to and those that we don't belong to. And finally, moving on to ethnicity. In order to understand the role of ethnicity, it would first be useful to define it. Ethnic groups are categories of people that identify with one another based on shared language, experience, culture, or ancestry. According to this definition, ethnicity can house many parts of our identity, as it will determine the language we speak, our history, our culture, our social structure, and much, much more. This sounds very similar to our definition of nation, yet ethnicity is felt to go deeper. There's often the assumption of a shared genetic background. For the purpose of this class, let's consider that ethnicity and another related term, race, are not the same thing. Race is typically considered as only a biological classification, something inherited at birth, and it's often used in a political sense. In fact, many anthropologists actually argue that race does not actually exist at all, that it's a social construct. However, ethnicity, as it is tied to shared culture, history, language, etc., does not have a contested existence. Others believe that ethnicity and race are one and the same. But how should we think of race and ethnicity? What ethnicity is an individual that's half Ethiopian and half Swedish? Can someone be ethnically Jewish? If someone is adopted transnationally or transculturally, what is their ethnicity? Can someone be ethnically Asian but culturally French? The topic of ethnicity is a fuzzy one, and scholars continue to debate this. Regardless, ethnicity does play a role in shaping our identities and the societies in which we live, as many of us perceive it to be an integral part of our lives.